All right, folks. Hi.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for coming to the All In on AWS panel. I'm really excited to have you here today and excited to have our panelists. I'm Frank DeGiamarino. I lead our U.S. state and local government business. And I got to tell you, I'm with everyone else who says just so awesome to see how many people have come out. And we really appreciate the time that you're taking and investing in building this community with us. It's been quite a ride, and we're looking forward to more. So you have in your book each of these folks and their titles. The format for what we're going to do here is we're going to start with Eric down on the far end here, and each person's going to give just 2 to 3 minutes on who they are and what they're doing. And then I'm going to ask them each a question, and then I'm going to turn it over to you guys to ask questions. Because part of this is wanting to get interactive and having you guys get out of this session what you want. We assumed you came to the session because you wanted to hear something. I'm always able to ask a question if you aren't, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of heads up. So it's Eric, Ryan, Bob, Chris, and John, and Eric's going to start us off.
Great, good morning. My name's Eric Geiger. I'm the Managing Director of IT Operations for an organization called the Federal Home Loan Bank. Specifically, I'm with the Federal Home Loan Bank of Chicago. And a lot of you probably haven't heard of us because we are a wholesale bank. We actually loan money to other banks, primarily smaller ones in markets where it might be harder for them to tap into large financial organizations for their own funds. And about a couple of years ago, we began looking for ways to try to save money, primarily in some of our key systems. One of them in particular was our analytics system. And it was costing us about a quarter of our overall infrastructure budget to run this system. And we looked for a way to do it cheaper. And it's a high performance computing environment. And Amazon was an immediate fit for it. So we took this thing we were running internally, we moved that entire workload into Amazon, and lo and behold, it cut the cost by about 60% for that one system. It ran about 20% faster. And that was a big win. So once we saw that, we thought, well, if we can be that effective there, can we be more effective in other areas? And we started to add more and more workloads into the Amazon system. And while we were doing that, we began to work with our regulators, with our auditing departments, and with all the other people who are going to have very strong opinions about using cloud-based computing to get buy-in from them and to make sure that we were using a model that everyone felt would be safe and secure. And over the course of about 23 months, we managed to not only get everyone's buy-in, but as of April of this year, our entire infrastructure was moved into Amazon.com or AWS. So now, as we're talking, with the exception of networking components, everything that we have in all of our workloads, from our daily processing to our Excel spreadsheets to our huge back-end systems, they're all on Amazon.
Excellent.
I'm Ryan Fraser. I'm from Harvard University. I'm a director in the infrastructure area there. And we began about 3 years ago sort of kind of looking a little bit at Amazon, driven by sort of this interest in agility and kind of looking at compute on demand was how it was phrased to start looking at that. And so we were exploring and testing and experimenting, and almost exactly a year ago at our sort of big annual IT summer event, the CIO got up and said, we're announcing several kind of new visions for the organization, and one of those was that we would be 75% to the cloud for existing applications and all new applications in the cloud within 3 years. So that obviously kind of initiated a lot of organizational work to sort of figure out a 75% of what, and how many applications do we even have that kind of fall into that. So a lot of work at kind of exploring and baselining that. And so we've been spending time now sort of trying to figure out what does that mean and how do we approach getting into the cloud. And I'll be honest, it's been a lot of struggle and challenge trying to figure that out, and a lot of that having to do with the approach and the culture and the change and the impact of that, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But So, but that's where we're going, and it's been exciting because I think a lot of people in higher ed has certainly kind of initiated a lot of activity, sort of focusing on moving higher ed into the cloud, and seeing that as sort of a great opportunity to deliver value and really support more of the kind of core mission activities in teaching, research, and learning.
Hi, my name is Bob Michelli. I'm the Director of Technical Services for King County. And I think we were early on in our journey for the cloud. We have been using SaaS solutions that are cloud-based, but now we're taking an approach to IaaS, infrastructure as a service, to the cloud. And we started out with the premise of, when looking at cloud services, we want to have a cloud-first concept. So anything net new that we're doing today, we're going to look at the cloud first as a solution. There's a lot of costs that involved with infrastructure on-premise. To give you an example, I run a data center as well, and my bill is $3 million a year just to run the data center at King County. So one of the first things that we've embarked with is really backups. And we're using NetApp as a tie-in between our on-premise and the cloud. And this year, we're going to save $1 million, just an infrastructure refresh, and we're going to save about $200,000 in operating costs. So those are some of the things that we started with right now. And we're also looking at other solutions like DNS, Route 53 is the next thing that we'll do, and also apps. And an interesting thing was that last night we had our first major app in the cloud. There's an application that we do for the Department of Natural Resources that manages about $500 million worth of their capital investments. And last night at 5 o'clock we got the email, hey, we're going live with the application, and 5 hours later they launched into production. So as of this morning, there's about 75 people in King County who are using a top-end business application.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Chris Spence. I'm CTO at an international organization here in Washington called NDI, the National Democratic Institute. And what NDI does is help people around the world make their countries more democratic. So we work in about 65 or 70 countries, kind of on the front lines with democratic activists who are trying to create political space for political reform. And so NDI is based here in Washington. We have a global field operation. And our journey to the cloud started in about 2010, and it was really for a few reasons. The first was for programmatically on the ground in these places where we work. We found ourselves continually rebuilding applications and kind of reinventing wheels and building infrastructure in different environments, and it was cumbersome and it was expensive and it took a lot of time. So one of the main reasons we went on, sort of looking at AWS and virtualization in general, was to streamline the ability to roll out applications, and I've got some examples of how we did that. Hopefully I can share them later. Second was from an internal operations standpoint, very much like that. We were not meeting our own internal compliance goals. We weren't hitting our backup policies. We weren't hitting our patching requirements. And managing the on-premises infrastructure was cumbersome, and I'm looking out the room, I'm seeing some nods. A lot of people understand that that's a hard infrastructure to manage. So we were able to, as we've rolled our applications into the cloud, the DevOps operations are much better. We have automated backups and snapshotting that happens continuously. It's really streamlined those internal procedures. And I can't say we're completely compliant with all of our own policies on all those. Patching is hard, but we're much, much closer. And it's really moved the organization forward. The third main reason really is security. NDI is a political organization. We realized in late 2010 that we were among those targeted by the nation-state actors, the advanced persistent threat issues that we were starting to face. And we recognized that our small, relatively unresourced team couldn't really protect our own infrastructure. We needed to rely on a partner like AWS. They've got a very solid security environment. There was no question in my mind that moving to the cloud was going to be a more secure environment for us than trying to sort of duct tape and chewing gum our own environment together and keep it secure. So I think that's generally, from a nonprofit perspective, I can't think of a scenario whereby you're more secure trying to do it yourself than delegating some of that to the AWS people. So that's the three kind of main reasons we went down that path. We go SaaS first, and when we don't have a SaaS application, we go AWS, and if we have to leave things on premise, we will, but that's the least desirable option, and our goal is to get everything up in AWS.
Great.
Hi, my name is John Sankovich. I'm Vice President with Infra Alliance. We're a leading AWS partner. And our focus really is around trying to enable all these things when our customers sometimes have all the skills they need, and sometimes maybe they could use a consulting partner. We're an AWS Advanced Consulting Partner. We're an audited AWS managed service provider, which we're really excited about because that really enables, when you say the patching and that, it really enables that full life cycle. And then we're also a reseller. And I think one of our lessons learned as we've worked with companies and organizations is going all in can mean different things for different organizations. It's great if you can just shut your data center down and flip a switch, but we know that really doesn't happen that way. And so really focusing on a life cycle around it, and then understanding that every organization might have a different path to getting to that kind of end result. And so that's what we try and do, is offer that flexibility for organizations.
Fantastic. How about that, guys? 2 minutes and under for each one of them, right? Yeah. Well done. You guys did a great job. Chris, I was going to start with you talking a little bit about the drivers, and I think you just hit them so well that I want to jump right on the point that you were just making, which is security, right? And I'm just going to bounce around, I think, the panel a little bit here, but start with you. Can you just talk a little bit more about how you took on the security piece and what makes you feel so comfortable about it? And then I'll ask some of the other panels.
Sure. Well, I think the first point I would make is the one that I just did, which is that it's really, really hard, especially in a more sort of APT type environment or increasing cybersecurity challenges, that it's increasingly hard to protect your own infrastructure. I don't know if you've all been to reInvent, but I've heard the CISO and others at Amazon talk about all of the professional certifications and controls they have in place to protect that infrastructure. It's incredible. There's no chance that my team or my organization can build an infrastructure like that is that secure. So that leads to my second point, and that is that security really is a shared responsibility between AWS and you and us. And the Amazon infrastructure is secure. They provide great tools, security groups and all the other tools that allow us to build more secure infrastructure. So it's a shared responsibility. It isn't on them, and it certainly isn't alone. We're not alone in fighting that battle. So the shared environment, the Amazon infrastructure, security groups and others help us deploy, hardened by design infrastructures. We can clone out our infrastructure without having to reconfigure every Linux box. We've got backup and restore capabilities now, which we've never had before. The data is more secure. It sits in S3, a lot of it, and it's easier to lock down than it is on our NAS and some of our on-premises stuff. So that's the bit of it. I mean, the other interesting part about the security tools in the Amazon cloud, we have a bit of a hybrid. We went from about 85 servers, and we're not a large organization in 2011, to about 10 today on premises, and a lot of it's VMware, but there's still a few applications we're running locally, including some security products like ArcSight and Bit9. Well, all of the log files, both from all the servers in the Amazon cloud, are integrated. They can be deployed right into our security tools that are on premises still. And so there's the whole we have a virtual private cloud, so we manage it as a single network. And it's all a very manageable security environment to take care of. The last point that I guess I would make on security, and it's a little bit maybe unique to NDI, is that part of our mission and part of my team's responsibility is to protect people on the ground. And we work in election monitoring and human rights work, and there's places where people put their lives at risk when they work with us and using our tools in the cloud. Putting web applications in the cloud for something like election monitoring protects people better, because there's two simple examples. One would be you have a web application in the cloud, so you can access it from multiple places. So if it's dangerous to work in a capital city when you're monitoring an election, you can actually work from a third country and access the same data and have failover plans for if things happen on the ground. And the other is that the data is secure. So in the old days, we had to have databases running in a physical building in a fairly difficult political environment. And if somebody decided to come in and raid the place, your data is vulnerable. Well, data in the cloud is much more protected. We're able to protect the data, protect the people. And so the folks that are working in that, they can just obviously shut down their machines, walk away, and we have procedures in place to ensure that they're protected as they go through whatever comes next. But the idea that the cloud does help protect people as well as protect our infrastructure, I guess, was the point I wanted to make.
Yeah, that's great. Anybody else want to touch on security on the panel? Maybe, Eric, I'm looking at you for, I mean, you got pretty serious data going on there. Yeah.
But I agree with everything that was previously said. There are a lot of advantages to the cloud infrastructure. Obviously the infrastructure, the network layer, all of that's managed by Amazon, and they do an excellent job. But it's that bifurcated security component that really makes it such a unique environment. And so if you're using them, you obviously have this huge piece of responsibility to protect your data. And what's always interesting to me, especially when I go and I talk to people, is a lot of folks, they sort of move back in surprise. Ooh, the cloud, that's not safe. Ooh, the cloud, that's possibly a problem. And what we have really found and what we've been doing is, frankly, it's no different from a physical data center. The types of methods you need to use to protect what you have are the same types of methods you would use today. And it makes it very convenient because there are foundations after groups, after all sorts of information, whether it's NIST or SANS or any of these other, the CSA, these other organizations that can simply help you walk through what types of controls you need to have in place. And if you do your due diligence, which if you're looking at going all in on the cloud, you certainly will want to do your due diligence, you will find a framework that works for you, and you will then use that as a prescription for how to handle your security. The part that Amazon does, again, that's spectacular. The part that you'll need to do, it's very easy to go through and see what those things look like, and whether it's different types of security models you might want to do, changing the way that your networking, logging, and existing ops folks handle data, or the way that you handle your network. You can get all of that information. It's very helpful. And what ultimately then creates, you've got this great strong foundation with Amazon. You then have this great layer on top of it that protects all of your data and protects your people.
So I want to pull out of security a little bit and go to the all-in component. And Ryan, you talked a little bit, you alluded to wanting to talk more. So how do you get the whole organization, and when what I mean by the whole organization, engaged in wanting to do what you're doing?
I mean, I think these cultural elements are, they're exciting and challenging, and I think kind of, one of the reasons for our cloud adoption is actually, it's not just about sort of moving applications and kind of taking advantage of that or some potential cost savings or agility. This is an opportunity for us to sort of move our people forward as well, and that's a really important point and sort of aspect of sort of our initiative, is being able to sort of take people with a certain set of skill sets and sort of help move them along. Now that doesn't mean everyone's necessarily going to want to or will make it, but I think it's really important for us to make that attempt. And so that's one of the things that I think has been really successful, particularly within the IT community, is we've been very open, very outgoing, and very engaged with kind of the larger sort of IT workforce that we have. And we have kind of monthly, we call them big groups, where there's sort of kind of open calls for all the IT people to come in, and a lot of times, sometimes they're presentations, sometimes they're sort of small working groups that we break people up to kind of talk through different issues that we're struggling with. But we've really kind of worked hard to sort of engage all of the workforce. And then I think kind of the other part of that is to sort of say, here's a path forward for you. If you're a DBA, if you're a sysadmin, here's kind of where you need to go. And so as part of this retooling, we've actually recently launched a whole thing called the Harvard IT Academy, which is about sort of more than just kind of cloud and other things, but really a sort of broad-based look at, how do you retrain this workforce and become a trusted advisor, and there's some other kind of foundational principles that we're working on. So that's within the IT side. I think kind of, in some ways, the harder challenges really aren't about sort of the disruption to, specific technical skills. I think it's kind of disruption to entire mental models about how you approach sort of business problems, how you work with solutions, how you think about sort of the financial models if you're at the TCO panel yesterday, we talked a lot about sort of just the impact and change and kind of the thinking of that. And I think that's incredibly disruptive in ways that are sort of can be a little difficult to understand from an IT vantage point about how those influence and will be in your organization. And I think you know, one of the things that we've seen, and I think this gets into kind of adoption approaches, is, you know, I see some institutions and some organizations taking a, you know, let's kind of work small and tinker and kind of build up some successes, and other places that have kind of, you know, put up the big banner and said, you know, made big proclamations. And I think both can work, but I think you have to be really cognizant of sort of where that's coming from. And I think kind of when the IT group makes a big proclamation about going to the cloud, to be honest, I think you're setting yourself up for a lot of work trying to convince a lot of people without a lot of evidence about sort of what the benefits are. And so I would say, you know, really think about, you know, what you want to do, because, you know, then suddenly you have a lot of very traditional questions being asked about, well, what's the TCO, and how do I look at the ROI, and what's the business value of this? And so when that's driven by the IT, suddenly you have a lot of work just to convince people of those things, and you may not necessarily have a lot of good examples that you can show them out of the bat. So I think that's something that we've learned in trying to sort of say, you know, let's maybe just focus on kind of some lower exposure kind of areas. On the flip side, I think kind of, you know, if this is being driven by the business, I think that's very important and exciting. But then kind of the cloud part can almost fade into a little bit of the background as the enabler for these very exciting business initiatives around agility.
And Bob, you maybe can pick up on that a little bit and talk about, in your scenario, you're kind of doing some of what he just advised.
We're in the middle of it right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, you know, I think that you definitely made a good point around the staff. I think that was one of the biggest challenges. You know, I think the technology is the easy piece, but the stakeholder work is a lot more involved. On the security side, we had to do a lot of work with our law enforcement agencies and healthcare agencies to address HIPAA and CD's requirements. On the staffing side, you know, that the staff, especially in government, the average age of the staff in King County is about 55. That's the average age right now. So you can imagine they're probably not too receptive to change, right? And they've been doing the same job for like, you know, 10, 20 years. So when you introduce something new like this, they're really afraid that they're going to lose their job, they're going to be displaced, you know. So you have to be very sensitive to that and show them that, hey, you know, right now the backup is a perfect example, you know. We will do 2,000 tapes a year, you know. So, hey, you won't be doing that anymore, but here's something else that you're going to do that's going to bring value to the organization, and have those conversations. And it's not a simple one-time conversation. It's over and over and over again. Work with them for months to get through that. Mm-hmm. And you'll be surprised the pushback that you get from your own team on it, but it's something that we have to recognize and address it when we move forward with these initiatives. Yeah.
Cool. John, what are we learning about how to do development and get these tools in use and working with the, you know, partnering and making leaps in new applications and new solutions?
Sure.
And agility.
So I mean, software development is kind of a core expertise for our company, and so it's been really interesting to go through this process where, you know, to get apps out in the cloud right now, you know, there's not a lot that have been done. People are kind of starting at that IaaS level. So on the DevOps side, we really are excited about that, and we actually have a session. So I'm just going to give you a teaser, because we have a session right after this one at 11:30, an entire session just around DevOps and kind of best practices that we've learned. And AWS is actually on that session with us because we're tightly integrated. But what we've seen is, you know, towards the points that have been made, the technology is not as big a deal as it's really the change management piece. And so that's been a real interesting thing, because change management's been around for a while, and the study of organizational change, and now we're kind of adapting it. And so there's just some lessons learned that we've worked through. But I think towards the point, you know, it's the ability for a developer to actually now, AWS has enabled it a lot more, because previously maybe an application developer said, look, I don't have access to the physical servers. I don't know how to do any maintenance on it. If something goes down, it's not my responsibility. And what AWS has done is enabled it, because it's all an API. So really, there's no geographical or, you know, physical assets to manage. And so we've seen, just when people really do want to embrace it, the developers, they can really now look and say, I have everything I need. And so it's been, although organizational change has been around in the concept of DevOps for a long time, AWS has now really enabled it because of the way they've, kind of architected a software-based, data center. So for us, that's the real difference. And so it's almost like dusting off some old playbooks and say, look, give it another shot to think about it because it is different this time. And you do have a different set of tools. But we do have a whole session on it at 11:30. So if you have a chance after this.
You guys' trailer trying to pull you guys in. So now's the time for questions from you. Does anybody have anything that they want to ask any of these guys? You want to meet, or I can keep going. But go ahead and just please say your name, where you're from, and.
Require us, because we're a smaller organization, to rely on AWS. And I understand that it's always a shared responsibility, but is that any different if you're not in a nonprofit world? No. Because I'm curious why you would make that distinction. I think it's more about maybe, number of resources.
Yeah, good question. The question, I don't know if you could all hear, was I made a point about in security how nonprofits in particular, it's hard to make an argument that you can improve, that going into an AWS environment won't improve your security. And she asked, wouldn't that be true for everybody? And I would say, absolutely. I didn't want to speak for any other industries. I've been in the nonprofit industry for a long time, about 19 years, and I know very well that environment, the security challenges are considerable. They're disproportionate to the amount of resources we have, even more than in government or even in the private sector. So I think it's hard. But I would suggest that it's probably true for just about any industry. I can't think of a scenario, maybe with a few exceptions, the DoD and whatnot, where you feel like you've got the internal resources to protect the infrastructure at the network level on up, through the application that can compare to what they're doing with the AWS security team. So that was the broader point. I absolutely agree with your view there.
Good question. Next. Anyone in the back?
Yeah, hi, Joe Carter with Acquia. And this is a question for you, Bob, specifically, but maybe folks in the broader group could respond. In a lot of state governments, they've spent several of the past years building big, shiny data centers. You said you ran one. We see a political tussle within states in trying to move to the cloud because they have built an internal resource in a large data center. But I think they're finding, to the point of security and those kind of things, hard for them to run it as well. But in state and local level, it's a true political issue because the legislators have budgeted funds for these big, shiny data centers. And now folks are going back and saying, hey, it's really better for us to do this in the cloud. So I don't know if you could, Michael Cockrell, the state talks about this as well. State of New York, I think several examples where this has happened. Any comments or suggestions? And this kind of gets to some of the change management you've all been talking about.
Yeah, I mean, the number one suggestion is just don't build any more data centers, okay? That's the number one recommendation. The state of Washington is unique, maybe not unique, but definitely they have a particular problem with their data center. And actually, I worked for the state at the Office of the CAO for several years where that was all going on. So the state of Washington built out a data center about 60,000 square feet. And by the time they were done, they figured they only needed 12,000 square feet, okay? So now we have a giant data center, only a quarter of it's being used right now, and they're trying to figure out what to do with the rest. They tried to sublease it. Nobody seems to be interested in it. There's a huge glut right now in the data center market. If anybody's into data centers, you know that's really cheap to get data center space right now. So my advice would be don't get into it. Right now, we're in a 30-year contract on our side of the house. Our first out for King County is in 2020, but we're trying to renegotiate our lease with our vendor right now and actually split our data center in half, because virtualization has shrunk everything up. And I have empty cabinets everywhere. So my best advice is don't go into the data center business. It's not worth it.
Oh, right here.
I'm Michael Rada. I work at NIH here in Bethesda. My question is to Eric. You mentioned, I think, that you did the entire infrastructure in 23 months. Mm-hmm. Were you doing it mostly one application at a time, sort of vertical migration, or were you doing an entire environment at a time in a horizontal, like everything in a dev environment and a test environment?
Right. So that's a good question. So the short answer is we were doing both. We were taking big pieces of environment, specifically development, and moving huge chunks of it at a time. But then obviously once we hit our production environment, we needed to slow down a little bit. It wasn't the kind of thing we could just cut over in a day. So we had the advantage previously of beginning to do our disaster recovery in Amazon. And a big part of our migration, ultimately, when we got to production, was that we simply enacted our disaster recovery plans. And we would fail app over app, and we would do maybe 3 or 4 a week, well, 3 or 4 sometimes in a day, just to get them all over. We would have liked to have done a big bang approach, but like I said, that just wasn't reasonable. It would have killed our technicians.
Hey, Ryan, maybe can you talk about that as well? Because you have to get 75% done in a certain amount of time, and how are you thinking about it? And
the approach that we've been taking is looking at each individual application, and I think kind of, we are not wanting to do a big shift and lift out to the cloud, and we could, but I think we're seeing this also as an opportunity to sort of, pay down our technical debt as well. So I think there's really, let's kind of take this as an opportunity to do a little bit of light standardization, kind of get some common patterns, make sure we're doing things consistently, be a little more thoughtful about sort of our application portfolio. So there's a little bit of rationalization that's going on. It's a challenge in that sort of, that's still a lot to move. We're talking 350 applications is the count here. That we're not going to be able to rewrite all of these applications from scratch, but we are trying to sort of do some improvements in tuning. So it's much more about sort of an app by app view is the approach that we're taking. But that's driven by kind of the particular objective and goal that we're trying to meet. So I think that's a really important thing to think about. Sort of what is it you're trying to achieve by a cloud migration, and what is it that's going to deliver it? If you have a colo contract that's about to terminate and you don't want to re-up it, then lift and shift may make the most sense. Pick it up, move it out there. You can terminate it. You can refactor that later. If you're trying to sort of get some benefit out of agility, and kind of retune that, well, where are the business needs? Who are you going to get that from? First and most. Where are your advocates in the organization? So I think really looking around about what is it you're trying to achieve? What are the problems that you're trying to solve? What are kind of the risk factor that you have coming up? And then sort of tuning your adoption to meet that.
yeah, please.
One point I also wanted to add, that's a brilliant strategy, that DR migration as your strategy to move into the cloud. That's brilliant. There's another bit of advice, I guess, that we have, and that is that if you have a mixed hosting environment on premises and you've got all your different applications, and as we all do or did, moving to the AWS environment, regardless of the process you use, is an extraordinary opportunity to improve and standardize and improve security, improve your environment, and standardize. So it's almost a cleansing process as you go through and move things up there. You finally got standards you can enforce. You can build cloned and consistent applications across the infrastructure. So that was a nice lesson that we sort of, or a benefit we didn't anticipate. But we manage a much more standardized and improved environment as a result of the process itself.
Excellent. Great question. Oh, in the back here.
Brian, from the DoD, what do you do when people are in a situation where the cloud's not available, where you've got at the state level perhaps emergency responders who need to be able to rely on those solutions, and you have to be able to convince them that what they need to accomplish is going to be available when they need it, regardless of their connectivity. What's the sort of business case you can build to support that?
Does anybody want to grab that?
I can react to that a little bit.
Go ahead, 'cause you have the field
we have field operations in all kinds of low infrastructure environments, and that's a constant challenge, and it's a challenge to us because they push back on the buy-in, and you've got to figure out how to persuade people that one, the environments are getting better, and a lot of times they have better environment, and they sort of assume that it's bad, and it's not as bad as it really is. So you need to actually assess what's really going on. We do have environments, say Liberia, or actually Liberia is pretty good, but there are places where they have legitimate concerns. Reliable bandwidth is a problem, and in those cases we work around it. Our strategy is to provide web services for everything. Everything from Google Apps to all the business systems, and so there are risks in that process. So we try to anticipate them, and we try to put in alternative. You can use Outlook if you really do have a situation where it's required, or you can have a network server in the field office if it makes sense. We require them to go through a risk assessment so that if a lot of these are security policies, so if they're going to introduce non-standard platforms or approaches, we put in place alternative practices which are kind of blessed by our security people so that we facilitate productivity and they can work in their environments without necessarily putting themselves at risk or the systems at risk. But it is a hard, ongoing challenge, and we still hear it here in the U.S. Even our staff in Washington. You know, we don't. What if it goes down? Well, we work with those objections, and it hasn't been a huge problem. The AWS infrastructure is amazing. It stays up.
Doesn't work in Afghanistan very well.
Well, there you go. Afghanistan might be another example. And the other part of advice we give to our people in Kabul, for example, is sometimes you do have to invest in reasonable internet service. And a place like Kabul or Baghdad during the day, if you had to spend $5 or $10 grand a month on internet, that was the cost of doing business, and we had to advocate for that. And even if it meant a little bit less, fewer political activities or conferences or whatever, and that's part of the argument as well.
Anyone else? Sometimes I can't see in the, because of the light. I don't, so apologize. Yeah,
I
Matt?
have two questions for two people. I'll start with Eric, and then I'll move over to Bob. Eric, Cubs or Sox?
You know, all Chicago sports teams are really spectacular.
He's a politician.
Can I just say the Hawks and be done with it?
Thank you. Bob, you had mentioned earlier that your next project on is Route 53. Why did you choose Route 53?
Well, you know, right now we provide our own DNS services, right? And you know, I got researching into Route 53, and just so happens when I was flying down here, I met up with I was flying with one of the IT managers for the city of Redmond, which is in my county. And then when I took the shuttle, the same guy was there again. So what's up with this guy, right? So we sit down, we're talking, and Route 53 came up, and he just went live with Route 53 for the city of Redmond. The city of Redmond has about 57,000 people. So we're talking about it, and we're talking, yeah, we're planning on doing the same thing. So I asked him, how much does it cost you to run DNS on Route 53 on a monthly basis? Does anybody want to guess how much it costs to run DNS on a city with 57,000 people? Any guesses out there? No? $30 a month. That's how much it costs. Okay? So he's going to spend $360 a year to run DNS for the city of Redmond, 57,000 which is the average city size. In King County, we're a bit larger. We have 2 million people in King County. So we estimate it's going to cost us $1,000 a month to run DNS. And it's not just DNS. I mean, if anybody knows about Route 53, it's the high availability and the resiliency of that product. We could never do what they're doing today. That's another thing. So don't build data centers. Don't build DNS. You know, I think Amazon does a great job with that, and that's where we're going next, which is Route 53.
Very cool.
All right, and maybe I can talk about a few other things if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
Since I'm on a roll right now.
Yeah,
right?
you're on a roll.
But I got a chance, you know, to talk to a lot of people here in the conference. That's part of it. Part of it is the presentations. Part of it is the people that you meet. And I met some really good vendors out there who really are complementing, you know, AWS services. I met companies like Socrata that's out there today. They're working on open data. They're working on exposing our citizens' data so they can use it so they can make good decisions around it. And one of the things that we're using them for today is around, you know, health inspections at the restaurants, right? So if you go to a restaurant, you want to know what the latest inspection, you know, results are. Usually you see them in the newspaper, right? But you don't have them online. So this is one way the citizens can, you know, make informed decisions. And then I had dinner with a very young startup company, and they're called Quickit or Quick E-Tech, right? And what E-Ticket, and what it is a company that they're out there. They want to modernize traffic tickets. So when a police officer comes up and they stop you and they go through that process, they want to actually digitize it. So it's not paper-based, so it can all be done online. And not only is it going to save, you know, law enforcement money, but also that officer, it cuts their rate by 50% for that traffic stop. So that means they can spend the rest of the time out patrolling, you know, and helping the citizens. Yeah. You know, I had a mixed emotions. So you're gonna get my traffic ticket processed sooner. Yeah. But yeah, but there's all these startup companies out there right now, and they're being enabled, right, by these mature cloud solutions. I think that's one point I want to make as well is that, you know, really where we are today as IT leaders, you know, more than ever else, we're enabled to modernize our infrastructure and modernize our services. So I think there's no reason why we can't move forward in that direction. So I encourage everybody to talk to these folks out there. They come up with some great ideas and a lot of solutions that can really help us as a government. So.
I think kind of echoing off that is, you know, it's also a challenge, and I think kind of in, you know, big enterprise IT shops, I think a lot of times when you're looking for solutions and vendors and things that complement, you know, there's kind of this big process, think about what our needs are, what is it, you know, get all your stakeholders, kind of go through that process, and then you make a decision, and you get to sort of forget about it, and you've kind of made it, and that's the standard thing that you do for the next, you know, 3, 5, 7 years. And I've seen kind of one of the challenges we've had is sort of, you know, we look at kind of these things and we're like, oh, okay, we need to solve this particular problem. And so it's kind of, you know, the same sort of this big thinking about, well, how will this work when we get to 600 applications, and will it scale? And we look at that solution, oh, that's going to cost a lot. And I think that mindset needs to change in terms of how you solve your problems. And I think that the perfect example was, you know, we were doing this, we're thinking about how do we look at network traffic and log that, and this is going to be really expensive, and there was a little bit of hand-wringing, and then sort of the next day, you know, oh, VPC flow logging is now on, hit the checkbox. And so problem solved. So I think there's a lot of times, you know, bring in kind of the focus on sort of the problem that you're trying to solve, and not try to think about it, I'm solving this for 3, 5, 7 years, but you have to be much more agile in looking at this and recognize this market moves so fast and the needs change so rapidly that if you're attempting to kind of always solve these problems in the traditional way, you're never going to get very far, you know, not going to get forward very fast. And I think that's part of this kind of cultural mind shift in sort of unlearning a lot of things that sort of worked in the past and that were best practices that may not apply anymore.
All right. Oh, 3 minutes? Yeah, go ahead.
Just a quick one, I guess, to pretty much everyone. So when you decided to go all in, what's your first thing? Do you hire consultants? Do you go and train a bunch of people?
Yes.
Amazon architecture? How does a large bank organization know what to do with this thing? What do you go through, or a political organization that doesn't really have a lot of technological expertise, I see?
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of partners out there that can help you with it once you make the decision. I think to take it a step earlier in the process, though, you know, the decision to go all in, you know, the way you get there, at least the way we got there, was essentially by putting our toe in the water and seeing success, and then seeing more success and seeing more success, and it really just starts to build on itself. And when you see that things are coming in cheaper, when you see that your reliability is higher, when you see that the resiliency is, you know, is stronger, you have options opened, you know, up to you that you might not have had before, like it's certainly not going to help in Afghanistan, but the, you know, geodiverse data centers across the country, in the event that there's a regional disaster in the United States, you can still be running, you know, in another region. You know, those things all start to make sense, and then you go, you know what, how do we get the rest of this in there? You know, how do we take advantage of it for everything? And then that's where partners really start to help. Moving a data center even into Amazon is not, you know, it's not simple. It still requires a lot of work. And having partners who can help you with the right tool choices, can help you do some of the prioritization that you were talking about earlier, you know, that was invaluable for us.
I think for us it was really starting, you know, a lot of this is, what is it I even have? And so kind of doing that inventory is really critical to understanding, you know, what it is and how do I classify it and how do I think about in the context of moving it. And I think that's both applications and services that you're running as well. And then I think the other part is you know, think about some of these foundational elements. I think, you know, what's your networking look like? How do you think about account structure? How do you think about some of the financial and chargeback models? You know, how are you doing the sort of authentication and some of those services? Are you setting up shared service areas? I think thinking about some of those foundational elements, and I think that's certainly where, you know, you can kind of work that out on your own, work with Amazon, work with a partner, kind of help understand what is it that you need in place before you start kind of pushing all of these things out there.
Yeah, I think that if you're used to the traditional on-prem technology and now you want to move to cloud services, there is a huge gap in scaling. So I definitely recommend that to get a VAR, you know, get a value-added reseller on board. And right now we're using DLT. So they come on board, they give us guidance, they help us out with the architecture, and we're coming up with a roadmap of what we want to do first, second, and third, and take it one bite at a time. Not go all the way, you know. Eventually we'll get there all the way in. Our all the way in plan is for 5 years, but there's definitely some low-hanging fruit that you can implement, like was mentioned here, that you can bring value up front, and that'll help you build confidence and trust into the cloud environments.
Our process was a little more shoestring a little bit. We have really great engineers, but we just have a few of them. And so we set them loose in the test environment and let them go kick the tires in Amazon. It was quickly apparent. We knew about the platform, and strategically it was clear to me that that was the vendor and the platform to choose. But they started kicking the tires. Amazon brought some resources, some consulting expertise to the table for us early on to make sure we were getting our architecture decisions right. But really, we didn't. We have a consultant who's really a extension of our team, who's a very, very talented engineer who was involved, but we did most of it ourselves without an outside VAR or any sort of a, but again, it's a small infrastructure relative to some of these.
I want to hire you guys.
Yeah. Hey, watch it.
I would just say one lesson that we've learned is really just trying to leverage, when you work with 30, 40 different organizations, you know, when we do sit down, you can leverage all of those best practices that we're seeing across. And so sometimes you can try and do it on your own, and you might be trying to solve a problem that's already been solved numerous times. And so that's one advantage maybe of the partner network.
Great. Well, thank you guys. You were great. Really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your experiences. And thank you guys for taking the time, and enjoy the conference.